Welcome back to the Institute for Black Male Studies. It is good to have you here as we get back on our feet and start going again. If you're not familiar, my name is Dr. T. Hassan Johnson. I'm the founder of the Institute for Black Male Studies, and this is part of our interview series where we interview Black men with different backgrounds, most principally those who do work with and for other Black men, and kind of get an understanding of their lives and how we've gotten to where we've gotten. So I would like to introduce you to a good colleague of mine who I've been looking forward to having in here. So let me go ahead and bring him in. This is Officer Charles Faulkner. How you doing, sir?
Hey, how you doing, Doc?
Doing well, doing well. Good to have you here at the Institute.
Oh
Uh,
yes, it's good. I like the camera work. It makes me look bigger than what I am.
I don't think we got to try hard, brother. I don't think we got to try hard. So anyway, I like to start these at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about where, Charles was born and where he grew up and really, who he is.
Ooh, Charles Lawrence Faulkner Jr. was born April 1st, 1982, in Baltimore, Maryland. Ah, born to Charles Sr., of course, and Loretta Bazemore. Um, I have one older sister from my father from a previous relationship, and my brother. We have the same parents.
Mm.
Grew up in East Baltimore. Parents divorced when I was 9, so stayed with mom, then went back to dad. So those were some interesting and trying times in itself. School, school was funny for me because I was always the overachiever in many aspects. Because as you can sound and you can hear from the sound that's coming out of my mouth, sound a little proper even for my Baltimoreanisms. But some liked it, most didn't. So growing up, when you're the skinny, small little boy, you had to go through a few scraps, but it was interesting because going through, for example, fourth grade, because I was so quiet and reserved to myself, I was actually referred to a mental health specialist for children,
Mm.
where they thought there was some kind of mental deficiencies because I was so quiet instead of naturally being seen as somebody that's his disposition. Come to find out, in the fourth grade, they said that he can do at least 10th grade English, social studies, history, and science. And even to this day, my mother and I laugh at that report because I still have it. And zooming through to high school, that's when the
Well,
Charles.
let me ask you this real quick. So, what grades roughly? What time frame were we talking about where they found out you were gifted? What grades were?
This was around fourth grade.
So about
Fourth
fourth
grade.
grade. So prior to that, how did the teachers and administrators see you? How they treat you?
They treated me fair, but it was it was interesting because the caveat of going to a public school was you had really great students on one hand who were gifted,
Mm-hmm.
and you had students who were expelled from public school, and the only school they can attend was a private school. So you had the best of the best mixed in with the worst of the worst. And to make it seem, because I actually believed in the Christian faith at the time really strongly. I don't even think it's the Christian faith. I think I just believed in just being emotionally nerfed, I guess. You go through the picked on phase where because you were so small, and it was rough because you dealt with people who intellectually they could be a lot better, but they didn't want to be. It wanted to be part of the hood culture. They wanted to be a part of the something that's fun. You can have fun and learn, but they didn't think you could put two and two together. And God forbid you're wearing glasses during the time, and you're dealing with family matters. And Steve Urkel was the thing to watch Fridays. So when I went through the school and the teachers, we were pretty cool, but it was something else when, out of those gifted students, you were like one of the only black males. I mean, it was one of the few things I've actually learned. Like, why aren't there many other boys here? And it's been that way when I went to eighth grade, especially. There was like the advanced class and the normal class and the people who needed a little bit of help. And me and my boy Ern, we were the only two males out of like roughly 27 students in the advanced class. We were the only two males.
With it now, what percentage of the class was black?
It was a black Catholic school when I went to eighth grade. Majority of my schools, because Baltimore is roughly 70% black.
Right.
Were predominantly, if not all, black. But the problem was when you seen the advancements, you notice that you don't see a lot of males, black males especially.
So you were in a full class, a gifted class, and there were only two brothers, including yourself.
Only two. Correct, Doc.
Wow. How about, life in the hallways after school? You know what I mean? How did things go in those arenas? How were you treated?
Especially during high school, ninth grade, that's where I met 90% of my best friends to this day. 26 years and rocking. We got along and we really quickly and was stuck like glue. Like it was funny because we're like brothers. We'll pick on each other, wrestle each other, box with each other. But if one of us calls, we're coming with bells on and bringing hell with us. So going through the hallways was pretty cool. And ninth grade was like, oh man, because I've been to private school since the age of 2, and now in ninth grade I'm going to Lake Clifton Eastern. And at that time, Lake Clifton kind of looked like lean on me, even though they had some good programs. But the ninth grade class was something else. I don't regret it because you learn to be on two sides of the coin of the block. And, as they say, you know how to code switch. You can fit in two worlds. So by 10th grade is when things started to really become galvanized, And that's when I actually found one of my first loves besides comics. I found that when I was 4, but wrestling is when 10th grade hit. Boom. And I met a man, may he rest in peace, power in paradise, Mr. Larry O'Neal Brown Sr. And shout out to his son, who's a very popular and world-renowned painter, Poncho, Larry Jr. And when I met Mr. Brown trying out for wrestling, that was when, I became the man, pretty much the building blocks of the man that I became today. Because I had to understand hard work, dedication, and the one thing about the sport of wrestling, nobody else you can blame but yourself. What you put in, you definitely are going to get out.
I definitely remember that. I used to wrestle in middle school and parts of high school, and it was no joke. It's a team sport, but at the same time, you're the only one on the mat. So,
yes.
So what would you say that taught you?
Pain, but one thing about it, you learn many lessons as a young man. You learn many lessons. I remember training really, really hard, being really diligent, and before we can go to the regular season, I was challenging Mr. Brown, and you learn very well how to respect older men. We had a saying, respect the old men in the profession where the good die young. And I remember when I'm trying to wrestle him and I'm moving him around, and then when he plants his foot, I'm trying to move him, and he's like, it's like trying to move concrete. You just couldn't move him. And next thing you know, my feet are where the sky are, and then where the sky is, and boom.
Yes, sir.
And we're on by the way, when you try it out, we had to wrestle on grass. So
Yeah.
and I was not unconscious.
Yes, sir. I've had
But
those
like you said,
experiences.
respect, and
Yeah.
I remember wrestling up for my first match. I was winning 4-0, just taking them down, doing what I want.
Mm-hmm.
But because of my inexperience, I was rolling to my back thinking I'm doing something, but then I get pinned. And right at that moment came, you know, that fork in the road. You know, you look at that paradox: either quit while you were ahead and say this wasn't for me, or you become much more intense, train harder, come back and fight again. Let's say I listened to the come back and fight harder part. So speeding through the season, I was pretty successful. And when the tournament came, I met the guy I lost my first match to, and I pinned him within less than 2 minutes. The semifinals, I went up against a guy who was wrestling junior league, which is like pre-high school. So he had all the experience, and I pinned him as well. And I remember Mr. Brown had decided the mat, like, because Mr. Brown never cursed. He had more discipline than a Shaolin monk. And he was like, "Come here, boy. You know, if you beat him, you're in the finals. You're in the championship finals, man. If you gotta rip him in half, do so. But make sure it's legal." So I pinned him, and I go against the guy in the finals. To paint a picture, 2 weeks prior, I wrestled him, and I was wiping the floor with him. He was not even in competition. He was no consequence for me. And I literally, one of the most embarrassing things you could do to a wrestler is, you know, just for the folks who's going to be listening, it's something in wrestling called a technical fall or tech fall. A tech fall is when you have 15 points greater than your opponent, for example, and that's the end of the match because he can't come back. It's too great of a deficit. For example, if you have 15-0, 16-1, 17-2, and I literally had him in a pinning position, even though I already tech falled him, I could have just walked off the mat and let him up, and I would have won by technical fall, but I pinned him and technical falled him. Let's just say in the finals, homeboy ate his Wheaties, his spinach. He might have had a little kryptonite ring in his back pocket or something because he gave me a hell of a fight. And we went to 3 overtimes. And I was so dog tired. I mean, tired. Like you're forcing your body to literally pump air. Like you cannot just do it involuntarily anymore. You're that tired. And he was stalling, which in wrestling, for those who are not familiar with the sport, stalling is when you fail to move in a circle or forward. If you make steps back, you're stalling. So I don't like it here because they're like, keep walking forward, he's stalling. He's stalling. So the referee calls, caution, stalling. And then they keep coaching me to keep forward. I'm dead tired. They like, keep walking forward, he's stalling. So the ref called it again, stalling, 1 point, new champion. I'm like, okay, we stopped. I was so out of it, I didn't even know I won the championship in my first year. They were dragging me off the ground. I was like, hey. They were like, hey, you did good. I said, hey, can I sit down now? They were like, you know you won the championship, right? Really? Oh,
he said, really? A lot of people who haven't done it don't realize that wrestling might be the most athletically challenging sport at most schools, but most particularly in like high school. I mean, the wrestlers were nuts where I went. Yeah. The kind of workouts they were doing made the football team, you know, it kind of really just outdid them because these guys were nuts. The way they would work out, it didn't end and begin on the field. It was 24/7.
Yeah, and you got to think once you hit the mats, like anytime we hit the mats, even just for training and practice, at some point you probably had not just the best wrestlers in the city, the region, you probably had some of the best wrestlers in the state of Maryland at one point on our team. And even to this day, you know, well, of course, my coach has passed. Out of 40 years of coaching, I want you to guess how many people he has in his Hall of Fame, I guess.
Mm. I have no idea. I can't imagine.
Out of 40 years, four.
Wow. Okay.
And out of those four, three of them we were on the same team.
Nice. Nice.
So, shout out to Gary Barclay, um, William Hobson, and hallowed be that name, Lloyd Cox. The fastest human being I've ever seen in motion, especially wrestling. Like, he could stand up tall and hit you with a low single, which I thought was the coolest. I kind of emulated some of my style and from him in the beginning, then meshed my own. So, wow, those guys, shout out, because they deserve every accolade they do that they get. And that's a legendary group right there.
But what you were saying earlier about that mentorship with your coach, most particularly in martial arts, a lot of people don't talk about the importance of that. Because I know what you mean. I mean, I did wrestling. I also did martial arts. I did Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. I did a number of different jiu-jitsu forms, most particularly Sanukas Ryu, which was one that was, real central to the Nation of Islam and a lot of those brothers. But the point I'm getting at, though, is the relationship I had with those black male coaches was like nothing else I'd ever experienced. It was a whole different type of fatherhood. It was very much akin to football and whatnot, but there was something about martial arts that took it to another level. And when you see these old men, sometimes they didn't look very imposing, but they will put you through a wall, and you learn about respect on a whole nother level. Because your football coach doesn't usually touch you. In martial arts and wrestling,
oh yeah, you got to think about it, because martial arts. When I even had to say this, because I was interested because I was a fan of the UFC back in the mid '90s when it came out, early to mid '90s. So, and it's funny, I've actually trained with Dan DeBeese. Little fun fact: before the COVID stuff and before I got injured, I was supposed to do a charity wrestling match with Dan DeBeese. So it would have been fun. But I did training with Dan Severin, met a couple of fighters. Just met even when I was at my firearms instructor course. Down the hall was a jiu-jitsu spot, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu spot, and Dean Lister was showing, like famous Abu Dhabi, multiple-time Abu Dhabi champion, UFC and Pride fighter, teaching leg locks. So I was looking like, hey, Dean. And I was like, wow. And back to the, meanwhile, back at the Hall of Justice, it's funny because wrestling is a martial art, just like boxing is a martial art.
Yes.
It's probably the oldest martial arts ever, because, you go into the pyramids of Giza and you'll see 3,000 techniques of guys boxing, wrestling, doing joint locks, ground fighting, and everything. And the part about Mr. Brown was that he gave a damn about you after the wrestling mat. He wanted you to be profoundly successful. He always wondered how you're going to be. He developed you. He said, look, let me know that you're in class, because guess what? This schooling is more important than what I'm teaching you now. Even though he was a teacher at the school himself. And, the radicalism about it was, as an educator, he already knew the importance of young black men. He was actually a very big Pan-Africanist, He did the painting. He was really pro-black, and a lot of the messages he said to us, because we were a black school, and of course wrestling, is going to be predominantly white guys. He had to literally openly tell us, when we go to the counties or we went to the Oakley tournament, you're going to be looked down upon because you're being told this isn't your sport. He says when you get on that mat, you prove to them they don't even deserve to be on the mat with you. And thanks to his training and guidance and the fatherly, and for some people, grandfatherly love that he brought, a lot of black men successfully walked across the stage and held their heads high, thanks to him. And I'm in forever debt to him as well.
Indeed. Now, I want to kind of go back a little bit and add in your love for comics, anime, sci-fi. I want to kind of, because there's a lot to you that I want people to kind of be aware of. You mentioned that you started reading comics at 4. Tell us a little bit about these other areas that begin to fold into, who you are and who you kind of become. How did that
Well,
happen, and what did you get into?
well, God blessed me for being an '80s baby, the greatest generational cartoons ever that we still hold to claim.
That's right.
I mean, you got to remember, I grew up with Thundercats, He-Man, and the Masters of the Universe, even Jim, and what was it, G.I. Joe, Alvin. I mean, my dad and my mom pretty much, they pretty much, pretty pointed me to that direction, because we had the underwear. Remember back in the '80s, little kids had the underwear with the superheroes on them, running around, and you're being toilet trained, and you're like, you don't want to mess up Superman. Okay, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. So, and my dad at 3 years old taught me how to use a VCR just by numbers game. 1, 2, 3. 1 to play it, 2 to 3 to stop it. I think it was 2 to stop it, 3 to rewind it, and 4 to eject. So at 3 years old, people were just amazed, like, this kid know how to use a VCR? He's like, yeah, he probably could fix it too. So it was very instrumental because my dad would walk me into a toy store. He'll tell you the stories himself one day. Like, we couldn't walk you past a damn toy store for anything. You had to get a toy. You loved your He-Man. You loved your Superman. And because reading was really important in my family, they just gave me a whole bunch of books at like 3 and 4. And then because I was advanced and my parents taught me to read at an early age, I was loving it and reading it. As a matter of fact, little keynote, which is funny to this day, I think for my 8th or 9th birthday, my parents got me The Dark Knight Returns novel.
Mm.
Even though I shouldn't have been reading that comic, but it's still a classic to this day.
Yes, sir. Yes,
It's
sir.
still a classic. And I mean, even during that time, because of the cartoons, and because of how anatomically correct, the characters of Thundercats, G.I. Joe, He-Man were, it inspired me to draw. And the artistic, resonance started to build.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got in trouble for drawing on notebook paper until my mother smartened up and just got me an art pad.
Yes.
That's my dad. And it's funny because the anime game is just as old as we are, if not older.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember watching old episodes and reruns. Of course, they're reruns by the time I'm little, but, Gigantor, Astro Boy. But by the time we were kids, I remember Fist of the North Star,
Mm-hmm.
Diver,
Mm-hmm.
Project Echo, which is, if you haven't seen Project Echo, I don't know what's wrong with you.
Robotech. That was my joint.
Robotech. Oh yeah, definitely Robotech. Robotech was soap opera for kids.
Mm-hmm. And people died in there. Yes, I
People
remember.
died in it, just
Mm-hmm.
like Voltron. If you've seen Voltron Uncensored, you're like, wow, this is some deep stuff. And it's crazy because I remember this before, Dragon Ball Z was big, because gateway anime for a lot of people was Dragon Ball, and I'm like, even at BlurCon, people say, you don't look your age at 40. I said, thank God, I'm not trying to. So when they're like, the first anime I watched was Dragon Ball Z, and I'm like, the first anime I watched was Fist of the North Star, or
Right.
I forget, like Night Cop or something, or Project Echo. So it kind of grew on me because, as shout out to our boy artist and MC, we came up in a time where this culture was not popular as it is now, because it's I feel like a snob when it comes to anime and comics, when people are telling me
Right.
telling me about the characters and only watch the movies. Like, no,
Well,
no.
I want you to be a little careful when you lean too far forward. The camera cuts off the top half of your
Oh,
face. So, but
okay.
no. Now, before we continue with the impact all of that had on you as a young man, just to kind of clarify, so you grew up with both your mother and your father.
Yeah, till the age of about 8.
Okay, and what did they do for a living?
My dad, My dad was a Marine Vietnam vet.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to him. And he was a cab driver, even though he used his GI Bill, went to diesel mechanic school, and went to drafting school. Like, I mean,
Nice.
I've seen the drafting that he's done, and it's like he could tell you if he wanted to build a building, he could tell you how many bricks it would take with none extra or none minus.
Wow.
My
Okay.
mom, she was when she found out she was pregnant for me, she did armed security, which is funny.
Wow. Okay.
Before when she found out she was doing armed security, when she found out she was pregnant with me,
Okay.
and then she became the housewife, and she didn't work for like years till my brother and I were old enough to go to nursery school. Then she went to do what was it? She was a nursery school teacher for a
Okay.
minute,
Okay.
caretaker. So we came from a very, very blue collar family, and even though my father broke off, he started his own business when it was a cleaning business. Then he broke off again, and he became a home remodeler for multiple people through the state of Maryland. As a matter of fact, one of his most grateful clients was a Maryland state judge,
Mm. Okay.
and his work was so good he actually added on another $150,000 value to his house because he fixed his basement and made it look immaculate.
Okay.
My mom, she just retired from food service and crossing guard.
Okay.
So she loved it. So,
Okay.
and plus,
So
she has her associates in early child development.
okay. Nice. So take us to late high school and the transition that takes place after that. So you're a wrestling champion at this point. Your parents have split, and and I want to hear about if you maintain a relationship with both after the split or how that went. But tell us about that late high school transition into adulthood.
Well, in my younger years, it was touch and go because I will tell you it was some bitterness between them both. But after a while, it became chill, so I still had a good relationship between both. Um, Short story: the tournament was Saturday, so that Monday coming in to school, I brought the trophy and the bracket because if you win the tournament, you get the bracket, the trophy. I didn't like medals. I like the trophies, but it was so funny because my coach was the printing and technology coach as well. So of course he has to come to the school earlier than the students. So next thing I know, and anybody who's been to Lake Clifton, especially the old school, it's about 500,000 square feet. So next thing I know, we walk through the front door with my buddy Sean, and he's like, "Yo, you the champ, yo!" And we walk in there, we just paused and stopped because now we see these 7 foot posters and these, sheets of paper that says 160-pound champion Charles Faulkner through the whole, through literally all the walkways of the school. And it was like, oh my God. Um, I was shocked. I didn't know he did that. And next thing you know, people are like walking up to me, "Are you that champion guy that wrestles?" And it was like some of the prettiest girls at school, and you're like really swole, like, yes, I am. So it was very, very gracious and humble, I may say, that I was. Then the second year, as my coach would put it, the second year, which was my 11th grade year, um, he says the secret is out. You're no longer the dark horse. Everybody's gunning for you, man. And that's when I met a guy, Dre Hudson, that we know as Just Dre. And we met. Right now, he's living in Japan with his wife, his beautiful family, his wife, and his kids. And Dre was a year above me, so he was in his 12th. And Jesus Christ, we had wars.
Mm.
That was one of the few people who was physically stronger than me. I've always been blessed by the Goldilocks zone when I wrestled. So for those of you who don't know what the Goldilocks zone is, it's the perfect trifecta or quadfecta. I don't know what else comes after trifecta, but people who match my strength couldn't match my speed. People who could match my speed couldn't match my strength. People who could match my strength and speed couldn't match my skill. So that was the Goldilocks zone. I remember, you got to think about it. To give you, I actually bulked up and went to 171. To give you how much muscle I was carrying, because in wrestling you have to take your body mass, index or ratio. So I couldn't cut weight, so I was at 3.5% body fat. Looked like an anatomy chart, looked like chiseled from Michelangelo. And I'm a good size 171, and I remember Dre just picks me up with one arm, and pushes me off of him. I'm like, oh, you one of them. So we actually respected each other so much that we would, anytime we would see each other's match, we would actually, it's like a classical musical. Bravo, bravo, bravo. Like, and we would talk, we're like, why did you do that? Well, because he gave me this and I was trying to go for that. It was good camaraderie, but when we stepped on the mat, it was like, boom, it's wonderful. So I end up beating him in the finals, and God knows he made me work for it. It was not easy. I had to outmaneuver him because he was so damn strong and so low to the ground. And I had to really, really give my all in that one. And after that one, for that 11th grade year, this is also the year that the skill level started to explode, because I was invited to an international tournament in Germany, Amsterdam, and I think on the outskirts of Russia to wrestle. And it was 120 wrestlers invited from America and whatever the number was for the other countries. And out of those 120 coming from America, there was only 2 black wrestlers. Guess which one was one? And it was something exciting, because I was like, wow. My parents asked me, they were like, do you think you're good enough? And you're kind of like, hell yeah, I'm good enough. Yeah, I'm good enough. And you're like, I better be. So they supported me going. And over there in Germany, it's kind of weird, because I was like around 16 at the time. 16, yeah, I was 16. And it was crazy because, people hear about the Nazism and all that other crap. I never felt so respected, and I wasn't even an adult yet, like a black man, till I went to Germany. People were polite. People, kids over there were like, because I had like some Nikes or Jordans or something, and they were like, wow. And I didn't know the money exchange, and they were like willing to pay the equivalent of $500 for my tennis. And if I knew, I would have let them. I would have walked back to the hotel barefoot. But it was an experience to go overseas and travel, and to get that admiration and respect. And when I went there to wrestle, the first kid I wrestled in the tournament was a Russian kid. And it was like, it's on now. So when I beat him, I was like, wow, you should have seen every wrestler in the arena and on the side. Their mouths were dropped because they never saw a black guy with that much skill, I guess. And I'm like, I can wrestle, 3 things I could do is breathe, wrestle, and police work. And I'm going to work on breathing, get that down pat. And that experience, when I got the bronze medal over there and came back, and it was like, wow, you're pretty legit, kid. You're pretty legit. And I think it paved the way for a lot of wrestlers who wrestle now internationally. Like, you have like guys like Aaron Brooks, and he's a world champion and also a silver medalist in the worlds under, for the juniors. and he's currently a two-time NCAA champion for Penn State, and he's from Maryland. So a lot of the things you see that we were doing back then, a lot of the wrestlers now who are black are really benefiting, and I'm proud of them. They're making us look great, man. And it's just like that time I sent you the picture where out of 10 weight classes at the NCAAs, 5 of those champions were all black men.
Right.
And recently, with the recent Olympics, we have a sister. Her name escapes me, and we also have a brother who won gold medals. And before that, we only had 3 men in history to ever win gold medals at the Olympics. Now we have 5, including the sister.
Nice. And so this was, what grade were you? What year were you when you were in Germany?
This was transitioning to my senior year. That summer between the senior year.
Okay. Take us through senior year. What happens at this point?
Senior year of high school was like, it was funny because popularity was thrust upon me. I never asked for it. Remind me of that song, that rock song in the 90s from Nada Surf, Popular. Like, all the faculty loved me, all the students loved me. We never had an issue. It's funny, I never really even had a fight in high school. So that was funny. Everybody liked me. So once that happened, me and my friends, getting ready for, all the senior ring dances, all the stuff, all the senior events, the trips, which was fun as all hell. And we were just rock stars, man. It was our school. We were the seniors. And that year for wrestling, I pretty much doubled my win ratio because my junior year I was 17-5. My senior year I was like 31 or 32-4. It's putting up college numbers. And early in the season we went to the McDonough tournament, which was a private school tournament by the private school McDonough. And I was just going through people because I was still in shape. I was probably in the greatest shape. I was going 6 minutes a match and not even sweating, barely sweating. And I was just eviscerating. These are kids who were getting tutored by this guy in college, went to this camp, and I'm just running through them like X-Lax. And won that championship, and they were like, wow. To give you how much notoriety that tournament had, there was a big white guy named Mike Faust. He was actually #1 in the country for wrestlers, at least heavyweights in the country, was at the tournament. He said, and he came to me and shook my hand and was like, man, you basically so many ways, you got that juice. And it was nice to get that admiration. Meanwhile, in that season, I guess, some of my buddies would say you met your your arch rival, Minor from Forest Park. And Minor was built like, you ever see those He-Man action figures back in the 80s? That's how he was built.
Damn, I used to collect them. I understand.
That's how he was built. And I'm going to tell you one person you don't want to get in a fight with in any sport. You don't want to fight a gymnast because they are ridiculously strong. And I've done some functional strength like pull-ups and some other gymnast stuff, but he was a gymnast, and that's where a lot of his vaunted strength came from. And it was funny. I'm the returning champion, just 2-time returning champion, went up a weight class, took their championship, took the championship from McDonough, and next thing you know, I'm going against this guy, and I went off strategy because I try to go upper body with him. He's strong, I'm strong. Let's see who's the strongest. So I'm not wrestling my match, and he pins me. And we talk about being in the dumps. Once again, the metaphorical fork in the road. What are you going to do? So next thing you know, I was training like a Rocky montage, man. So we go through the tournament, and a lot of it, it's funny. It's been like, 22 years since this match occurred, and I go to the cigar shop. His coach is at the cigar shop, and he talks about the match still to this day. And he said, "Man, you talk about some warriors, man." He's like, "Man, if we would have had you two back then, you guys be millionaires." So it's great for people to remember it that long ago. And as my coach, Mr. Brown, said, he's like, man, and he's as much as a coach as he is, he's a fan. Because just on a side note, going back to Mr. Brown was into wrestling, boxing, and also bodybuilding. He was the world's greatest Lee Haney fan. Oh, man.
Yep.
You don't know who Lee Haney is?
No. My father was a bodybuilder. Lee Haney, Albert Beckles. I remember them brothers, man.
And he was the biggest Lee Haney fan. And I mean, that's why we were lifting, man. We got strong in the preseason and the post. And he was just as much as a fan because you could see how animated he was. He was like, he would do this when I'm like almost about to get caught in a move. He's like, "Come on, boy. Don't give me a heart attack. I want to live." So we're going through the match, and it's like boom, boom. And he's like, "Stay with the strategy." He's like, he wants to go strong. You go low. So, that match was a masterpiece in my mind because obviously I won, but it was funny because we were down on the mat where he's in the bottom position in the referee's position. So we do something called a chop, an arm chop, where you're chopping him right there in the crook of his elbow. Boom, boom, boom. Imagine me doing that to you for at least a minute to 2 minutes, moving around and then just going back to it. So I don't care how strong you are, the nerves in your arm are deadened. So we get to the third period, scoop, chops right up. The arm gives away. I put him in an arm bar, half Nelson, run it, stacked him, and got my glory back. I was like, I had to tell my coach. I said, "You see that?" He's like, "What? See that 500-pound gorilla that's off my back now?"
So this was the same guy that had beat you before.
Yes, sir.
Nice.
And in the words of my coach, he said he was your rival at first, but after that victory, you became his master.
Okay, so this is still senior year.
Senior year, going to the prom. Oh, prom was fun. Prom was fun.
But now,
and senior year, we went to the prom. We went to the senior trip, went to the prom, and as soon as we graduate, here comes. I forgot that I signed up for the Army at 17, so my year was 17. So now they're saying, "Hey, you're out of school. Hey, you got by the time I graduated, I had about less than a week before I shipped off for basic in Fort Benning, Georgia."
So you forgot that you signed up, or what happened?
No, I knew that I signed up. I thought I had more time, at least a month.
Okay.
Okay. It was about approximately 4 to 5 days.
Now, what made you sign up?
Well, one, I was in the JROTC program, and shout out to Sergeant Scott and Colonel Wilkerson. They're retired now, of course, but they were telling me things about the military, the benefits, and Colonel Wilkerson was a Vietnam vet. And Sergeant Scott, he mainly dealt with admin and different things within the Army. So they actually spoke to me and actually got me in touch with a recruiter. And my mom was for it. My dad was for it, but he wasn't at the same time. He wanted me to go as an officer, but you have to have a college degree to be an officer.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to go, but I think the enlisted experience is needed more so for younger men.
Mm-hmm.
And then become an officer is my personal belief. But that was one of my dream things I wanted to do. I always wanted to be a soldier, and plus I was bombarded by the propaganda that was called G.I. Joe. So I didn't fight Cobra. I fought everybody else, but not Cobra.
Okay.
So off to Fort Benning, Georgia, I go at that moment.
Okay. Now, what takes place after this point? So you're in Georgia. You're training for the first time, and as far as the military is concerned, Um, what, how difficult was that transition, and then what happened?
That transition was difficult at times because for a lot of young men, this is the longest you've been away from your family, your friends. I'm born and raised from Baltimore, and I'm in Georgia, basically right next to a Columbus, Fort Benning. So there was nobody near me. So this is new territory. You have a lot of young men who are around the same age, even though one of the oldest guys we have is like 38, 40 years old. And he was, of course, he was the platoon, leader. And you've seen a lot of people who were ready for that lifestyle and seen some people who just wanted to do something with their life because they had nothing else to do. So here's the part where I tell people I've gotten in more fights in basic training in 3 months than I did in 4 years of high school. And one of the guys, he was from Nashville, Tennessee, first. I can't, you could tell when I don't like people when I remember their name from 20-some years ago. He just had this bully mentality. Like, I treated basic training almost like a prison sentence. Hey, do your time, do your training, enjoy the fun parts, and get out there. Mm-hmm. He brought a lot of that street mentality to the Army, which doesn't play right. So, of course, he gets his little clique and his little buddies, and he's intimidating a bunch of guys. He was, for reference, he was about 6'3", 235 pounds of muscle. I mean, arms like tree trunks. And he's intimidating these guys. And, I'm like Superman in the Snyder Cut. I'm not impressed. So, and for some reason, the drill sergeants made us bunk mates. And we got into a really nasty altercation. And we were running 12 miles. I don't care who you are. I don't care what shape you're in. You run 12 miles, you're not going to be the nicest person after you're done. Sorry. And I catch him stealing out of my wall locker. So, of course, I push him. He hits me with a right hand. I hit him back with a right hand. He charges at me. One thing in a fight, never run into a wrestler. Never charge at him. He gets flexed into the wall locker. I start doing what they call a UFC ground and pound. His buddy claims that he's breaking us up, but he's only holding me. I'm being a good wrestler that I am. I just grapevine him, like tie him down with my leg so he can't get up. And I'm still hitting him with my right hand while the guy's holding my left. So my buddy, he comes in there. He's like, what the hell's going on? So literally, by the time I realize it, because I'm literally blacking out from the fight because I'm so angry, I was furious, that I had a guy on my arm, another guy on my arm, and one guy on each leg, and same thing for him. And we were heated. Little side note to the story, my father drove from Baltimore to Fort Benning for my graduation. He brought my little brother with him. He speaks with my First Sergeant Whitehorn, black guy with a Native American name. Green eyes too. So he speaks with my father, and of course, you know how old soldiers talk, and he's like, yeah, remember when I was in Paris Island and had to go for training with the Marine Corps, went to Camp Lejeune and all this, and he's like, oh man. He's like, man, good talking to you. It's good to know an old guy in the service. What's your name? He's like, my name's Charles Faulkner, man. Faulkner. And he's like, all right, what did my son do? He was like, your son's a maniac. He took the largest person in the damn company and tied him in the knots. And come to find out, one of my drill sergeants, they all had a bet between that. They knew that it was going to be inevitable that he and I was going to fight. So there was one drill sergeant who had the money on me that I would win. And according to him, he won somewhere between $3,000 to $4,000. I couldn't make this stuff up, man.
Okay. So, military. Tell us a little bit about What happens there now? Did you go to? Were you in any particular altercations, military altercations, or anything of that nature?
Oh yeah, because I remember 9/11 very vividly to this day. I was in class at Coppin State College at the time. That's dating myself because now it's Coppin State University. And all of a sudden, class just let out. The professor said, "Hey, we gotta leave." And when everybody's leaving, I'm looking at one of the monitor screens and I'm like, man, that looks like one hell of an action movie. Great effects. Lo and behold, I get home, and I'm glad I did go home at that time because they were canceling public transportation. I turned on the news, and what I was watching that I didn't know when the plane, I actually watched it. It was the flames from the first building, and while it was filmed, when I looked at it, the second building was hit. And I'm thinking to myself, like, yo, everybody okay? And I'm on the phone with my friends and family members, and I don't know what was going on at the time, but I just started packing my duffel bags up because I knew I was going to go. And a couple of years later, I was right. So that was during, when we invaded. And then after that, of course, we invaded Iraq. I was called up, and I was supposed to go to the first wave of Iraq, but they sent us back home. So I ended up going to Operation Iraqi Freedom Wave 2. And this was one of the most difficult but adventurous times of my life, because Wave 2 was even worse than Wave 1, which was the invasion. Wave 2 is when we dealt with the IEDs, the improvised explosive devices. And this is also during the time when the Rumsfeld, fiasco, when one of the soldiers asked, what about the armored vehicles? We didn't even have armored vehicles yet. But we had to learn how to weld. We had to put sandbags over top of the steel we weld to the bottom of the Humvees in case we rode over something. And when I was in Iraq, I was detached to Alpha Company, who were in the guard towers. And I looked at the soldiers who were out the wire. I said, who's that? Well, that's our quick reaction force, or our QRF. They go out there, they do missions outside the wire, 30 miles out. They do reconnaissance, direct action, all kinds of tactical stuff. I said, okay, I want in. They're like, you sure? It's very dangerous. I want in. I'd rather do that than be stuck in a guard tower for 10 hours. And I tried out for it. I got on, and I was trained to be the 50 cal gunner for them, and also the Overwatch. We trained religiously on building raids, reconnaissance, humanitarian missions, and direct action, convoy support, VIP security. We have actually were the bodyguards for a high-ranking general. I can't give the names out. And some high-ranking senators also can't give the names out. So we did a lot of stuff. We worked hand in hand with the Iraqi police and forces. We also trained them. We were also assisted Army Special Forces, aka the Green Berets. I'm not Special Forces, but I got nothing but love and respect for them dudes. But we gave them assist in a lot of things, and they assisted us in a lot of missions as well.
Was there any reason you weren't interested in going into special forces?
Ignorance. I didn't know that I loved tactical work till I got to Iraq doing tactical work, and I was like, man, I should have done this the whole time. I'd excelled at it, and I really did, because when we went through the building and house raids, we were pretty tactical. We had to train. If we weren't, there's very few times we had downtime. Of course, we would play our video games, card games, but we were training. We would go through how to tactically go through a building, go up steps, down steps, how to clear rooms, how to engage with targets. And I think it's the sheer ignorance and not knowing a lot of people who went through that type of special operations training. And oddly enough, one of the guys who was at the firearms training facility, he's a retired black captain who was Ranger qualified, Army Ranger, and he was also a Green Beret. And he said that he had the time of his life. But I think a lot of young black boys are not told about it because we don't have a lot of them in that field, and sheer ignorance, and people talked them out of like going out. I had a friend of mine who said he was going to join the Navy, and he said as soon as 9/11 happened, he backed out. I'm like, why? That's the best time to go. That's what your job is for. And you know, when we were there in Iraq, we also did a couple of rescue missions. We rescued some Marines in Fallujah, and you got to think about it. Fallujah, from where our base was 30 minutes away. So we had to drive the equivalent of a highway close enough where we could see the brake lights of the car in front of us, but far enough that we had some distance. If an IED went off, you wouldn't have multiple vehicles hit. So the only person out there who had, I think, like lights on was the first vehicle. So, and during that time we were traveling, we were taking sniper fire, and you don't understand how fast bullets are until they come across your face about a foot away, and you can feel the heat coming from it, and you're like, whoa. But, you know, we successfully rescued the Marines who needed to be rescued and brought them home safe and sound. So that was fun times.
So tell us about, now, how long were you in the military overall?
On paper, 10 years.
Uh-oh, on paper. Okay.
Well, it's on paper, but, you know, you go into inactive reserve where you show up, hey, I'm still living, and you know, overall the time was 10 years.
Okay. What made you decide to transition out?
One, I've done my time. I've done all the greatest tactical work you can ask me to, besides going to like special operations. And I was looking for a much bigger transition. I got tired of traveling. I missed like 3, close to 4 birthdays. And I was looking for something new. So, and plus, during this time, I was transitioning out, and it was all good. But then later on, you know, here comes my son. You know, he's coming down the pipe, and I'm taking applications for different police departments. I think it's funny because I was going to try out for the Marshals, the U.S. Marshals, and I was talking to a recruiter, and I was explaining everything I did in Iraq with the QRF, and he was like, man, that sounds great. We're trying to bolster our special operations division. We think you'll be a good fit. Next thing you know, skirt. Federal hiring freeze. I was like, oh, man. So I was like, I still want to be in law enforcement. It's pretty similar to the military life, but I get to stay home. So I was like, hey, let me try this Baltimore Police Department again. And just to let you know, I signed up for Baltimore Police 3 times. I passed 3 times. And 2 of the times I couldn't go because I got mobilized, you know, had to go to Iraq. And the first time I didn't go to Iraq, so I took it again, but they said, hey, you're actually going this time. So the 3rd time's the charm, joined the department at 25, even though the same year, July 28th, my son was born in 07. And I was hired on September 18th, 2007. And was with the department doing patrol. Well, the academy was fun as well. But once we did the 6 months of academy, we did the 3 months of field training in the Northern District, and I was called back to the Northern after we did our foot patrol for about, from July to October. That was fun because, you're down the harbor, you're a freshly, newly minted officer, shiny belt, shiny gun, shiny badge, and you met people, you stopped a lot of crimes, you were in foot chases all day. As Ric Flair would say, you kissed the girls and made them cry. So many young ladies loved you because you looked so good in your uniform. But, in October, I went to my district, Northern District, and was in patrol Sector 2 for the better part of a decade. And I've literally had the pleasure of working all 3 shifts in the Northern. Until I found my calling, which was the midnight shift later in my career. Until I got hurt and injured, and right now I'm just waiting for them to medically retire me after my ankle and foot.
Wow. Tell us, so altogether, as far as police work, how long have you been a police officer?
Well, my first police position was with the Veterans Administration Police Department.
Mm-hmm.
So that was for a year. So I left there and I went with the Baltimore Police for about 14 years and 2 months. So roughly almost 16 years of law enforcement, including the 10 years of military. So I've been doing this for a minute and I'm only 40.
So what would you say were some of the most outstanding things you learned about Black men, whether it's in the police department or on the street? Like, what are some of the things that you kind of learned about that stand out in your mind?
I think that we underestimate the intellectual capabilities, the resilience, the demeanor, the class, and also the perseverance that Black men have in the military and in law enforcement, because you're going into 2 professions where there are so many people who fight against you going. Like, you shouldn't join in. That's a white man's army. No, it was your army before that white man even dreamt about it. That was your army. We're the first people to actually kill or die for the country. We believe in freedom so much that we've done the most heroic stuff known to man, even though we were never given true freedom until years later, decades or centuries later almost. So we have as the old saying goes, we have a problem of not seeing ourselves as inadequate. We have a problem of seeing ourselves as powerful beyond belief, in my humble opinion.
Okay. So, you've talked about this a couple of times on your show, on YouTube. And before we leave, I'm going to want you, of course, to let people know how they can find out more about you, where to listen to you. But talk a little bit about domestic violence cases and some of the things you learned as a police officer in regard to dealing with those cases. What are some of the things you've seen? What are some of the things you've learned about?
I'll tell you one thing as a rookie officer. A lot of things as a police officer, whether if you're Black, white, or anything else, a lot of what you see out there, especially in the media and all the movies, that you think Black men are beating the hell out of Black women, and it's not the case. I've seen a lot of it not even be 50-50. I've seen it more of the women being the aggressor. Even FBI statistics said nationally that 67% of domestic violence in the Black community, the woman is the aggressor. And it's fundamentally shocking when you have to go to these houses and you have to intervene and you're like, wait a minute, he hit me. But you see the guy with cuts bleeding through the nose and lips, and you're like, that doesn't compute. You hit him. And the pure shock on their faces when you have to arrest them for domestic violence, they're like, how dare you? I called you. You're supposed to believe me. No, we're supposed to believe the evidence that's presented in this case.
Okay. Now, you've done work over the years with Black men and boys outside of work. Can you talk a little bit about some of the projects or things you engaged in over the years?
Well, one, I think that I've given back to the sport of wrestling and for being a coach since 2001. When I came back from training, I was helping my coach's coach, and we had a 97 percentile rate of having young boys go across. We made many guys champion state placers, and fundamentally, we have we have a lot of stuff. We have a lot of stuff going on. Whereas we coached a lot of kids, not only through wrestling, but also put them through the military and other civil service professions. And we've also developed, right now, we developed, as you know from years ago, myself and Cerulli and Gray developed the Gray Faulkner Initiative, where to get more black boys inside the police, the fire, and the military. And I've always said, if you wanted reparations, why don't we take a chunk of America where they need us the most, which is the protection and the maintenance of it.
Okay.
And when you hold stake in it, it's going to be so easy for them to take that stake.
So this was, but you were also proposing this as a way to help young men come into their manhood who didn't have that kind of resource at home, right?
Oh yes, because you got to think, if 75 to 80% of young black men are raised in single mother homes, where are they going to find the masculinity? They have to go to places where they're going to be challenged as a man. They're going to have to be challenged as, somebody who can be part of the team and work. So they're going to have to be put in those male-dominated spaces, such as the military, the fire department, and the police department. And when you have that, you'll have a better functioning male in the black community.
Okay. Now, are you still doing the programs with the wrestling programs with boys?
Well, I haven't recently because of COVID. I might start this year.
Right.
But I'll give it a look and see. And I think it's interesting because right now, I think that I've been working on my security firm and getting a lot of young men jobs to actually become armed and security armed private detectives and also executive protection.
Okay. Yeah, well, talk a little bit about that. What made you want to start your own security firm, and how has that been coming along?
It's been making strides. It's, as you can see, yep, here's the patch, Black Lion Security, thank you. But it's been interesting, going back and looking at the training. And I wanted to do it for years because for some odd reason, we don't have a lot of us doing it. So it's funny because, one, who was going to protect us but us?
Okay.
Who better do that? And two, you can give a lot of young black men a way out because a lot of the jobs are not hiring them. You're having a lot of people come out and deny them. Like I've said before, you have Advance Auto coming out, and for some odd reason, they have nothing but women working there. Like I've never seen women get underneath the hood of a car and start doing auto parts work. But it's like an ex-girlfriend of mine. Why don't a lot of these dudes get jobs? I said, frankly, nobody's hiring them.
Okay. Well, let's do it this way. Why don't you tell people how they can reach you, how they can hear more about you, and we'll go from there.
If anybody want to reach me, they can reach me on Facebook Messenger with Charles L. Faulkner Jr. They can reach me at Charles Faulkner Jr. 1224 at yahoo.com for the email. And they can come to my channel at Charles Faulkner Jr. on YouTube. So, there's the food. Gotta love the food.
Okay. All right, man. I appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming through.
Any pleasure, Doc. Have a good one.
You too. All right. Okay. Let me. All right. So shout out to Officer Charles Faulkner. I hope you enjoyed the interview. If you know of somebody that does work with black men or boys that you think would be interesting to interview, somebody you think we should have here at the Institute for Black Male Studies, please go ahead and email me at the email address you see on the screen. Other than that, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And I hope all is well with you. You guys have a good one. Peace.